Bridges. I'm willing to bet that most of you walked through that door today with a looming thought about the space between where you are and where you aspire to be. You may be wondering if you should be moving faster or slower, in a more direct line, alone or with someone else. Some of you may even be wondering if you need to go back that way, just a little bit. But we all have that experience. I'm going to tell you my story today of crossing a bridge from plans to purpose, and I hope you hear something you really needed to hear. I knew early in my career that I wanted to lead. I did not know exactly what that meant. So I did what anyone who wants to do something but doesn't know how to do it did, and I started looking for the formula. I started watching the leaders who were around me, watching how they walked, how they talked, how they interacted, what other people said to them, how folks responded to them, and I started trying to model that because I wanted to lead, right? And they were working it out, they were doing it. It didn't take me long to realize that other people's winning formulas for leadership were not going to work for me. I could be inspired by them, I could be informed by them, but I could never be them. The good news is I also realized that they could never be me. And so I made it my business relatively early on to understand what it is that differentiated me as a person, as a woman, as a leader. And once I discovered it, I really started to use it actively to propel myself forward. Early in our careers, we do want to grow, right? We want to advance, we want to have a bigger impact, we want to do more. I know a story of a young woman, and I wrote about it in my book, who really wanted to get promoted. And so she kept telling her boss, I want to advance, I want to be promoted, I want to be promoted. Well, the issue for him was none of his peers really knew anything about her. They couldn't vouch for her, right? They couldn't say she's really good at this or she needs to develop here. And so she had essentially no visibility and no proof points behind her ability to lead. And so he sought an opportunity for her to get that visibility and get that experience, and came back to her and said, I have this opportunity for you to lead this project. It's really important work. We're not quite sure how to get it done. And we think if you can get in there and solve this problem, people will see you, they'll come to understand who you are and what you can do, and good things will happen. And she essentially said, I'm not going to do more work without the pay and the position. This is where you sigh, like, oh my God, she really said that? Because she really said that. You can imagine not much happened for her after that, right? Within 2 years, she was gone from the company. I always tell people in coaching sessions, et cetera, that we don't get promoted by being good at what we do. We don't get promoted by performing our jobs really well. We get promoted by demonstrating the potential to do more. And so each of us has an opportunity to lead from where we are. As I started to grow in my own career, I realized that success, for me anyway, had very little to do with pay and position, and everything to do with alignment. And when I say alignment, for me, that means the alignment of values, the alignment of your beliefs, and also the alignment of your expectations. When folks come to me and they say, I really want to be in the C-suite, or I really want to be a CEO, my first question is usually why? What kind of experience do you want to have? What skills do you want to use? What skills do you want to learn? And most important, what value do you want to contribute? The more we understand about the experience we want to have in work and in life, and the more specific we can be about that experience, the better equipped we are to align ourselves and our place with the right time and the right space. And so here I am, at my company, doing my thing, and I get promoted to executive management at 30. And I get an executive coach, because that's what you do when you get promoted to executive management, you get an executive coach. And she asked me within 2 weeks of being named to the position what my purpose was in that position. And so I tell her, well, I'm here to drive the business and develop the talent. And she cut me off. She said, no, I'm not asking you about your job description. I'm not asking you about your objectives. I'm asking you about your purpose. And I was perplexed, I will not lie to you. I was perplexed because I had reserved the notion of purpose for much heavier things, like disease and poverty and children. I never thought about purpose in the context of my work. And so I went away and I thought about it. And I did land on a purpose. At this time, I led an organization of a few hundred people, and they were really important to the company, at least I believed so. But they weren't always being leveraged as fully as they possibly could. So I decided that I wanted to transform that group from a bunch of people who put words on things, right, to say it simply, to folks who were thought leaders and idea generators, and people who would be brought into the fold early on in the product development process, instead of consulted at the end of it. And the beautiful thing that happened was everything I did as a leader grew out of that purpose from that point on. My strategy grew out of that purpose. My talent development practices grew out of that purpose. And the relationship and the overall energy of the group grew out of that purpose. And it did so in an accelerated time frame. So here's where I got my first hard lesson. Yeah, right? My first hard lesson, because I learned right around this time that not everyone was going to like me. I know, none of you have learned this yet. It was really difficult, especially I think as a woman, because we value our relationships, we want to deepen our connections, we want to broaden our circles, we want people to not only respect us, but to care about us, right? To like who we are and what we do. And I realized that the higher the rank, the harder the decisions. And the harder the decisions, the harder the feelings, right? That go along with some of those decisions. And so this was a difficult lesson for me. I wanted to be a thought leader. I wanted to shift paradigms. And I recognized that doing that was going to make some people uncomfortable. And not only uncomfortable, it would make some people very unhappy. I'm glad I learned it then. I've had lots of opportunities for it to be reconfirmed over the last several years. So that was the first hard lesson. But the first major lesson for me over the course of my entire career was this one: that your purpose is not confined to time or space. You are transcendent. And so I want to tell you a little bit of a story about how I learned this. Point in my career, I was ascending to the C-suite. I was in the succession plan to become a corporate officer. I'd been working toward that for about 6 or 7 years, this stretch opportunity, right? These relationships, this skill building exercise, and the unexpected happened. I fell in love, again. At this time, I know. I was living in Kansas City with 3 young children and single momming it, doing my thing, working it out. And I fell in love. And so that sounds like you're like, that's awesome. What are you stressing about? But I was an executive and he was an executive. And I was the breadwinner and he was a breadwinner. And I was in Kansas City and he was not in Kansas City. He was in Dallas. And so I recognized for lots of reasons, that the most logical thing to do was to move here to Dallas with those 3 children and start a new life. And so you can imagine that for someone who had a plan, someone who told you early in my career I knew I wanted to lead, that this was a major, right, point of transformation for me. But I had to reconcile the fact that my purpose, right, which was to advance other people's professional purposes, my purpose was not dead. It simply needed a new body. It needed a new way to come to life. And I realized that my job at that point in time was to find it a new body. And if I couldn't find one, I had to create one. And so I set off and started to do my own work. The first year of being on my own and doing my own work, I adopted what I like to call a generosity strategy. So I decided up front, before I even did anything, that I was just going to give it away. And that it took many forms. If people wanted to talk to me on the phone and get some advice, I would talk to them on the phone. If they wanted me to speak to their class, I would speak to their class. If they wanted me to talk to their leaders at their office, I would go and talk to the leaders at their office, right? If they wanted to meet me for coffee, I would have coffee. I would do all of this, and I decided I would do it without any consideration for what I might get in return. Some of you think I'm crazy, but I believed wholeheartedly that this generosity strategy would return to me greater than I could ever imagine, and God knows it did. Everything amplified for me after that first year. My relationships were elevated. My skills were refined, right? My contribution was heightened. Everything got better. Because when I gave, I got back more than I could possibly imagine. And so one of those visits to a company, when I was speaking to about 200 women, I had a young lady come up to me afterwards, and she was about 5 years into her career. And she said, you know, I heard you say you just wrote a book, and I've been wanting to write, you know, ever since I was little, but I really need this job. I can't quit my job because I, you know, have bills, et cetera, et cetera. But I really want to write. That's what I want to do. And she said, I don't know what to do with that. What should I do? And I said, you should write. You should write. Who says you have to quit your job to write? You can write at night. You can write in the morning. You can write on the weekends. You can write on your lunch break. Writing does not require you to completely leave one thing in order to do another. I said, so write, and don't tell people that you want to be a writer. Be a writer. Go do what you can't not do. We all have a can't not. I knew the things that were pulling at me and had been pulling at me for years, and I could not escape them. Go do what you can't not do. And so the deeper I got into women's leadership and development, I started to kind of see a couple of the warts, right? There are some warts, like maybe 2 or 3. And one of them is around this whole notion of women competing with other women. And so I started to kind of hear about this queen bee thing, right? I don't know how many of you have heard about the queen bee syndrome, but somebody makes it to the top and then holds everybody else at arm's length because I had to work really hard to get here, and so should you. I do not get it. I don't get it at all. Not one of us is diminished by investing in other women. In fact, we can only be enriched. And so I tell people, set your own high bar. We're not in competition with each other. I also realized that all this work I was doing to develop women leaders, individual women leaders, was great and awesome, but I was releasing them back into these climates, right? These corporate environments that weren't always healthy. It was like planting a healthy tree in unhealthy soil. And it really started to bug me because I never set out to change corporate culture, right? I set out to help women advance and do their thing. But I realized that my vision for doing that had started to expand beyond my purview. It got bigger than I planned for it to get, and it got bigger faster than I planned for it to get, because I knew that this was important, that culture is the soil in which strategies thrive or die, and it's also the soil in which people can thrive or professionally die. And so I had to step out and step up. And I started a firm. I'm president and CEO of that firm because why not? Why wouldn't I be? And really started a firm to help companies, right, create corporate cultures where people can win, where they can thrive, where they can grow, where they can be happy and do what it is they're uniquely equipped to do. Sometimes the need in the world pulls at you before you're ready. Sometimes it pulls at you before you're ready, but you've got to go. There's way too much work to do. And lastly, I just want to share and implore each of you to write your own leadership story. When we don't, someone else will write it for us, and I guarantee you they will get it wrong. And not only will they write it for you, they will tell other people your story. The wrong one, not the story you want told. Write your own story, right? With your pen and your dreams and your abilities. And I guarantee you, if you do that, and if you tell it often enough, and if you live it boldly, you will turn around one day to realize that it is no longer a story, it is your life. Thank you so much.